So, good evening, and a warm welcome to you all. My name is Mark Searcy, and I'm the Pro Vice Chancellor for the Faculty of Science. Thank you all for joining us for our third inaugural lecture of the autumn term. It's great to be here this evening. It's actually great to be here this evening. Welcome to all of you joining us here in the Thomas Paine Study Centre. And also thank you all of you who've joined us online via YouTube. Thank you for taking part if you're online, and please do let us know in the chat where you're viewing us from. It's also a great pleasure to introduce my colleague Simon Lancaster to give his inaugural lecture around the campus in 80 innovations, which he promises me that title is an exaggeration. But you can never quite tell with Simon. And when I read these biographies of an inaugural speaker, please do bear in mind that they are written by the speaker. So it's not my fault. This is the first one I think I've ever had that has actually made me laugh while I was reading it. So Simon was born in mid-Sussex in the early 1970s to a nurse and a railway worker. Simon enjoyed an unremarkable childhood, playing on the streets with the family dog and the local urchins. This is starting to be very Dickensian, I feel. During the holidays, he would nurture his nascent pyromania with immortal bonfires on his grandparents' tenant chicken farm. It was on those childhood holidays that Simon developed a lifelong antipathy to nettles, which he would dispatch with the approximation of swordplay. And this passion for organic weed control has endured to his Bluebell Road allotment, apparently. Simon was educated in state schools, where he's better known for his athletic rather than his academic prowess. His primary school standing long jump record stood for over a decade before being bettered under controversial circumstances. His sporting career was cruelly cut short after a self-diagnosis with concussion, which he later discovered was actually scintillating scotoma and migraines, a bane he regularly has to contend with when he's delivering teaching, effectively temporarily blinded. So let's hope he can see us tonight. Simon studied chemistry, physics, and mathematics at sixth form. He read chemistry at UEA. An entirely, and this is his words, remember, this is not me saying this, an entirely mediocre undergraduate record, which was punctuated by reprimands for creating an infinite loop on the university mainframe, and a bizarre intoxication incident involving a taxi, a watch, and the laboratory superintendent. Simon assures me that the 6-year statute of limitations on fraud cases has nothing to do with the gap between his promotion and his inaugural lecture. However, researching this inaugural has revealed a series of career accidents that would have been dismissed as absurdly unlikely before 2016. He was plucked from obscurity by Manfred Bockmann and offered first an undergraduate project, then an MSc, then a PhD, then a postdoc, and officially, finally, a research officer role in Leeds. Unofficially, 2 decades later, I think we can all concede that his appointment to a lectureship at exactly the same time Manfred returned to UEA was extremely suspicious. Simon has promised me that he will explain how he has progressed from a key experimental ingredient in the Bockmann rearrangement, a crystal growing machine who spent almost 20 years working in the laboratory to make up for 3 years of undergraduate excess, to an internationally recognized advocate for engagement in the lecture theatre. The teaching you're about to experience has been rewarded by the Royal Society of Chemistry and Advanced HE recognition. Indeed, Simon is a past president of the Royal Society Education Division. Simon is currently Interim Associate Dean for Learning and Teaching in the Science Faculty, and after what I've learned from his bio, he has a lot to do this evening if he wants to make that permanent. Please welcome Simon to give his inaugural lecture.
Well, thank you very much for that very kind and entirely accurate introduction. Okay, so it's Halloween. Happy Halloween. Now, let's start by doing something just a tiny bit scary. What I'd like you to do is to turn to someone near you in the lecture theatre that you don't know and say hello and introduce yourself. Okay, enough of that. This is about me, not about you. However, you will be taking many opportunities to talk to the people around you. So it's important that you feel that you can. And of course, it's one of the affordances of being in the lecture theatre space together. I know there are a lot of people online, and hello to you. You're very welcome, and thank you very much for coming. We've done everything we can to make this experience as interactive for our online audience as possible, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But I wonder how many were able to chat to one another in the various chat things. I hope a few did. Okay, so I've just realised I've left my pointer somewhere. Where is it? Oh, there it is. That's having a pocket does that. So, I'd like you to pick up your smartphones. If you haven't already done so, but of course I invited everybody to install some apps in advance, what I want to stress is that you will hear, especially if you frequent places like Twitter and look at the Times higher education pages or the Guardian higher education pages, this absolutely incessant dialogue about whether or not the lecture is dead. And what they do, of course, is they bring forward some expert on traditional university teaching who will tell you how much they infuse their students in the lecture theatre, how they challenge them to think about things. And then you will get the apparently counter story from an expert at active learning that says, in the 21st century, it's practically criminal not to get people to think about things. But of course, what they're actually doing is describing the same process. And so I'm not precious about whether we call this a lecture. But what I'd like to do is expand the definition of what's a lecture. And what better bastion of academic practice to expand the definition of a lecture than the great tradition of the inaugural lecture. So I'm going to take the inaugural lecture and I'm going to make it interactive. I'm going to physically force it to be interactive if necessary, whatever it takes. Okay, so we will be using some technology. Now, what I want you to do, so did everybody pick up a post-it note? Okay, so you've got a post-it note. What I'd like you to do is to take that post-it note and to write on it. Don't worry, you can do this completely anonymously by a mechanism I will illustrate in a minute. But I want you to write on your post-it note what you would like me to talk about, okay? It might be my allotment, it might be my pet dog, it might have something to do with higher education, I don't know. But write something on your post-it note. While you're doing that, if you haven't already, please, please, please install the Point Solutions app. Okay, so most of the interactivity in this session is going to be using polling technologies. We'll also, hopefully, given how long I go on for, going to have an opportunity to do some augmented reality. So also I'd like you to install the ChemFord app if you haven't already done so. And I imagine, well, some of you are already holding up. Clearly you recognise this is a QR code. Where does that QR code go? Well, it's nowhere dodgy, I promise you. Nor, Robert, is it Rick Astley. Okay? I promise it's not Rick Astley, but it is a Padlet site. And I really want you to go to this Padlet site because I'm looking forward to interaction between this in the lecture theatre audience and our online audience. I'd really like to see some evidence that the online and the in-person audiences have interacted. Okay, so can I ask you to take your post-it note and to fold it, okay? And then pass it to someone at arm's length. Pass your post-it note to someone at arm's length. Okay? Right. Now the person, can you now pass it to somebody else who is also at arm's length without opening it? Don't pass it back to the person who originally gave it to you. Pass it to somebody different. Okay, and one more time. Pass it to somebody completely different, not back in the direction. So some of you will recognize this as a fill race pedagogy. Post-it notes for all sorts of purposes. I wanted us to do this while we were busy installing the app, but in a moment I'm going to ask you to basically now do this using the app. So you hopefully have installed the Point Solutions app. That refers to those people who are online as well as those people in the lecture theatre. And this is a free text question. You can type whatever you like, but keep it short because it'll just get truncated. A couple of word, 3, 4, 5 word description of what you would like me to talk about in the lecture theatre. Okay, now take your folded post-it note that you've been placed and open it, please. Open your folded post-it note. Okay, who's feeling brave? Now, we all know that what's on the post-it note that you are holding has got absolutely nothing to do with you, yeah? It's not what you wrote. It's been passed on 3 times since then. You probably have no idea where it actually came from. So, who would like to volunteer something that is written on that post-it note? Catherine. A trip to Waitrose. Okay. Adam.
How do you design teaching to be both interesting to students and also give the correct and advanced education?
Okay, you'll never be able to fit that on the app, but and the lady and the gentleman who are there, have you got the same pieces of paper or different ones? Technology. You can't make it up, can you? You say technology, Siri wants to get in on the act. There's no way I could have planned that. Happens to me all the time. Very nosy is Siri. Okay, so hopefully 28, so this is a point where I want you to press return. There's always a diminishing return associated with these things. I'm asking you to press return if you haven't already done so. Incidentally, this app is all totally anonymous. I hope everybody just put their session ID. If you did enter your name, then I promise you I won't do anything with this information. But those people online, I hope you are playing along as well. So we have 20 seconds for the people online. Okay, 3, 2, 1. What have we got? Okay, what hasn't worked yet? I'm cool with anything. Knowing how many dogs are logged on. How many dogs are on? Pokemon Go. Somebody knows me too well. Okay, microbes, courgettes, chemistry, fullerenes, hyperin teaching. Okay, I'm going to talk about all of those things with the possible exception of Pokemon Go. Okay, right, how many innovations can we fit into 45 minutes? Many of you were looking at this. In fact, Mark was extremely nervous when the word 80 was mentioned. Because I sit with Mark in a monthly meeting, catch up for associate deans, and he has to kick me out of his office after half an hour because I'm still going strong, okay? However, we have a limited amount of time today because the wine will warm up, and that will be a disaster. Okay, so we do need to get through this. How many innovations can we fit into 45 minutes? Now, there's probably more than 38 of you actually sitting in this room. I can get, and I'm going to take a word from the great Fabio Arrico, positively medieval if people don't interact when I invite them. So there's no reason why you can't interact. This is anonymous. You've got nothing to lose and everything to gain by interacting with things. Okay? So, shot up. 55, right. So, there we go. We've got quite the distribution of answers. Those people who are keeping count, you can let us know at the end how many we actually went through. Right, it's important when you have a serial habit of overrunning like me to stick your acknowledgement slide in relatively early. And I have to acknowledge an awful lot of people, some of which have actually made the journey to come here this evening. And I mean, I'm just humbled by people who have taken the time to travel, in some cases, hundreds of miles to see me waffle, okay? I'm in Thomas Paine Lecture Theatre 4 days a week delivering sessions, not quite like this, but they have a lot in common with this one, I have to be honest with you. So for you to come out all this way is absolutely humbling, but I really do have to acknowledge my wife, Andrea, who puts up with me. Because you get this jovial, convivial personality who infuses in the lecture theatre. But there's a flip side to that. There's a price to pay. There's a miserable sod who goes home exhausted and has no patience left for his family. So absolute credit to them. And then the magic ingredient in the Lancaster household, smudge. This is just a cartoon, but you're in love with him, aren't you? Everybody is. That's just smudge for you. Okay, so here we go. This is, and I sent Mark a whole series of embarrassing school photos, and he chose not to show them. So thank you very much, Mark. You know, but they were there. You know, they were there. This is as young as we're going to get with Lancaster. This is this is me. On the left, if you hadn't worked that one out. The one in the middle is a gentleman called Manfred Bockman, who, as we've heard from Mark, is basically to blame for pretty much everything. And if you can't lay everything at the door of Manfred Bockman, then I invite you to lay it at the door of my parents, and there's my mum. Okay, so how did I get here? Well, Mark kind of alluded to it. I wasn't a great undergraduate. I think that gives me a certain empathy with students. Not that the UEA students aren't great. They're wonderful. But they face all sorts of challenges. Mine was sheer laziness. But I was adopted by Manfred, who saw something in me that I hadn't seen. He saw that actually this guy, he had green fingers. He was able to make things, to do chemical reactions that other people found challenging. Manfred discovered that by inserting me into otherwise unsuccessful chemical processes, suddenly they worked. And the Bockman rearrangement was born. And so we had a very successful academic partnership lasting many years. And this gentleman here is another legend, Ken Wade. So if you've ever studied any chemistry and you've heard of Wade's rules, this is Ken Wade, and this is him giving me a certificate for doing chemistry like the one on there. But this is not a chemistry session. This is a higher education session, so I'm not going to dwell on the chemistry. You'd be forgiven seeing that graduation picture for thinking I'd spent my entire life at UEA. I haven't. I spent 4 years at the University of Leeds. And this is me at the University of Leeds. Only one of these people is actually me, though. Okay, and so this is an interactive question where we're demonstrating again some of the facilities of the app. What I'd like you to do is to select which one of those likely people are me. Now, I know you love your Where Wally competitions, and you're used to looking for the person in the striped t-shirt. I'll give you a clue. The person in the striped t-shirt is not necessarily Simon. Okay? It might be, but it's not necessarily Simon, so don't get blinkered and fixated by your Where's Wally skills. Okay, so we've got 51 responses. This is going to look like a real polka dotty thing. 55. So I'm still hoping that we'll improve upon that. 3, 2, 1. Wow. Okay. What do you think Sean would think of that, Manfred? So there are two possible candidates here. Now, if this was a normal lecture and I had a normal amount of time, what I would do at this point is hand it over to you to have a discussion in order to determine that. But I'll let you know. Actually, the one on the left-hand side is me, and the one on the right-hand side is a guy called Sean O'Hara. And the one on the extreme right is the recurring theme in this presentation. It will stop, I promise. Manfred Bachman. Okay, so look at me. I've got a bit of a paunch. I'm middle-aged. I'm balding. I'm white. I'm male. And damn me, I'm heterosexual. I am incredibly boring, non-diverse person, which makes me an elephant in this room. Because sooner or later, UEA is going to start awarding as many chairs to people from a diverse background as it awards from people with backgrounds like mine. Now, I've said I'm a poor white male, but you probably don't even believe that because I have a home county's accent. Okay? What am I doing about this? Well, I am conscious of the need for me to address diversity. I am privileged, and I'm using my privilege in the only ways available to me, providing references for people who are less advantaged than I am, standing up for disadvantaged people wherever I can. I was privileged, again, to be one of the RSC's 175 Faces of Diversity. How on earth did that happen? Well, it happened mainly because there was a chemistry graduate who was in the project, and she nominated me because of my contributions to diversity in teaching. So what's this thing on the left-hand side? This thing on the left-hand side should actually be a totem of shame. Because let's face it, one of the big issues in chemistry is that it is very colonial. It is very white and European. And so there is this habit of naming things after people. I've never engaged in this habit, but I actually have a reagent named after me. This is embarrassing because this is exactly the kind of thing that I've been actively trying to minimize and remove from my own chemistry colloquium. So I'm not proud of this. I had no part in it. I've never called it that, but it's out there and it's part of the issues that we're trying to address. Now, this, given the slide I've just presented, is going to look like an incredibly vain thing to do. The truth is that ever since I started lecturing, which of course was a sideline when I was appointed to do synthetic inorganic chemistry alongside Manfred, it was a sideline that I was expected to do some lecturing. And I was good at this lecturing, at least I was popular at this lecturing. My lecturing was very well received by the students. So all of these examples of what I'm calling innovation, none of them have anything to do with trying to make me more popular. The most popular thing I can do is just stand there and wave my hands around and gurn at the undergraduates from the front of the lecture theatre. If I did that, they would love it, but they wouldn't learn. And so it's always a balance between how much they learn and how much I'm going to infuse. So these things haven't changed, no matter that my teaching is unrecognisable from how it was in 2002. Okay, now I'm not going to ask for a show of hands or a poll because I dare not. I have a confession to make. I feel a certain responsibility for Blackboard. The story goes something like this. I was a new lecturer, and of course new lecturers get lots of demonstrating work when they're chemistry lecturers or biology lecturers. So I got a lot of demonstrating in the teaching laboratory. Now this is not the teaching laboratory that I used to demonstrate in, but it demonstrates very well just how valuable a space a teaching laboratory is. That building cost in excess of £25 million to put up. So you want your students to make the best use of it. When I started demonstrating in the lab, I'd go into the lab, I'd walk in, and nobody was doing any chemistry. If I was lucky, they were sitting there reading their laboratory manuals. Sitting in an expensive laboratory using expensive time, reading their laboratory manuals. What a waste. So what I did is ask Joe Bruce, Joe, is there any platform that we might deliver a pre-lab test which could be marked automatically and just make sure that the students were prepped to come into the lab and to get on with something? Yes, said Joe. There's this thing in the States called Blackboard. We could use their remote server. And that's how it started. That's how it started. Then we went to the UEA trial version, and we've been using tests on Blackboard for well over 20 years. I didn't call that teaching innovation when I did it. It was just addressing a very specific problem that we recognized. The teaching lab has always been, for me, a really positive experience. It's an occasion. So what happens is everybody goes into the teaching lab and they're doing their chemical reactions, but some things like stirring and refluxing and filtering, you know if you're a chemist, they take time. It takes time to do these things. And there's an opportunity to interact with your peers. The laboratory is an incredibly social environment. And so what better way to celebrate that social environment than by making it a social media event? Let's create a hashtag. And so we use these symbols, these hashtag AIN symbols. So this is what I call hashtag AIN. It is a molecule in the shape of a hashtag. And I gave those to the students and said, put these in next to your reactions and take pictures and tweet them or Instagram them and share them. And so that's what we did. And we turned the teaching laboratory practical session into a social media event. Started off with these hashtag AINs, but then I went to a chemistry conference and talked a little bit to people about this and managed to blag myself 30, 40 chem quackers. And you can see a chem quacker on top of this swivel here. We got all these chem quackers and we replaced the paper cards in the lab with chem quackers. And Chem Crackers was photobombing all of our social media demonstrations in the lab. Now, chemistry, I'm a bit biased, okay? This isn't really a chemistry talk, you picked up on that already, but I'm a bit biased. Chemistry is by far the central science. I nearly said best. I didn't, I said central. Chemistry is the central science, and we make beautiful things, and we have dramatic reactions, and we want to share them. The world deserves more chemistry. So let's put these things out there on social media. Crystals are very pretty. I have to break it to you if you didn't already know this. They don't have healing powers. But they are, unless they're pharmaceuticals, sorry, Sue. Okay, they do have an inherent beauty. And so they look great on Instagram. And we had a wonderful occasion where a student shared their tweet, I think it was, on social media, hashtag CHE2C32, which was the module code before we changed. And it went, well, it didn't exactly go viral, but we had an academic from America telling students live in the laboratory in Norwich how beautiful their crystals were. You can't achieve a result like that any other way but leveraging social media. Okay, right, I think it's time for a bit of chemistry and a bit of interactivity. So while we're still in the virtual laboratory, let me teach you a bit of chemistry. So vanadium is a fascinating story. I don't want to get too woke on you and upset some of you with non-woke sensibilities, but vanadium is a really interesting story of colonial chemistry, because actually vanadium was discovered in Mexico in about 1800. But then some European chemists said, no, don't be silly, you've just got chromium. 30 years later, some Europeans rediscovered vanadium and named it after Vanity, the Norse goddess of beauty. So we know vanadium as vanadium, the Norse goddess of beauty. There was no chance of it being renamed after that. And so Vanity makes a great story, but it is actually Another example of a European colonial chemistry. Okay, enough wokeism. Let's talk chemistry. There is vanadium in oxidation state 5. It's this beautiful yellow colour. Beautiful is an overused word. That's because of chemistry. It's because of chemistry that beautiful is an overused word. Okay, here is blue vanadium 4. Okay, it's also a beautiful colour, I think you'll agree. And then we have the green, probably my least favourite, vanadium 3 oxidation state of vanadium. But that's only because the next one is the most beautiful oxidation state of vanadium. We have vanadium 2 in purple. So I'm asking you, vanadium 5 is yellow, vanadium 4 is blue, vanadium 3 is green, vanadium 2 is purple. Right. So if I do a reaction where I add electrons from zinc to vanadium, starting off with vanadium 5 and reducing it so that the oxidation state decreases, what colour will the vanadium go first? Okay? You don't have to be an expert on chemistry to answer this question. I've given you more than enough information to do it. It's relatively straightforward, honestly. And so I'm inviting you to tell me what the answer is. Okay, now in the interest of time, I won't give us too long, but I'd just like you to grab an answer for that one. So those people who are online, so the online feed is 20 seconds behind. So we sort of have to give an extra 20 seconds longer to enable the people online to have a little bit of time to think about this. But we've got over 60 responses. I'll never be happy until I have 500. 500 is the limit that the app will take, so don't worry if you haven't logged in yet, you absolutely can. Okay, 3, 2, 1, and there we have a distribution. I can't tell you how interesting I find that distribution. But the thing about the pedagogy I'm advocating is that I don't explain to you what is right. I've had my chance. I've shown you how it should happen. What I'd like to do now is to give you that precious opportunity to talk to real people who are surrounding you. So I'm going to reset this question. And just to help you, I'm also going to show you the reaction. So one of the things I would suggest to you, if there's a series of take-home messages, it is demonstrations are great. They're great. But if you want them to be more than chemistry pornography, you have to get people invested in what is happening. So I'm asking you, you've predicted what's going to happen. The solution is going to go blue. Now let's watch the solution and watch the experiment and see whether it does indeed go blue. Okay, so there we go. Right, so you can now watch the video, but talk to one another, okay? The video's going to take a couple of minutes, so that's 2 minutes that you have to talk to the people around you and to conclude what colour should come next. We know what the most popular the first time round was, but are those people right? Are they right? Okay, I hope that the discussions are taking place on Padlet and in the YouTube. So I don't know, I'm doing this especially here. This is a live interactive thing. So the more answers, the better. Okay, remember the question is not what colour is it now. The question is what colour did it go first? Well, you're not nearly noisy enough. This is either entirely obvious. So when I'm working with my undergraduate students, what I say to them is, you're allowed to answer the question again if A, you've changed your mind, or B, you've changed somebody else's mind. Okay? So you're not allowed to press your button again until you've either changed your mind or changed somebody else's mind. wanted to ask you, but it'll come over on the microphone. Okay, so this video is nearly finished. The video is nearly finished. So can I ask you, if you haven't already re-answered the question, to re-answer it with the benefit of the discussion inspired by the actual video. So if you haven't answered already, please do that now. Okay, so 3, 2, 1. Okay, so the answer shifted dramatically, hasn't it? From blue to green. I tell you what, it's really interesting because when I show videos to students, what I notice is actually what I think is obvious isn't always obvious to the people even watching the demonstration video that I've shown. So don't assume anything. It's definitely blue now. I think we'll all agree that. But what colour did it go first? The majority of us are now saying green. Would anybody like to proffer an explanation for this strange phenomenon? How can it go green if green is vanadium 3 and we need to get vanadium 4 first? Is there anybody here who's not tainted by their knowledge of chemistry and is just a sensible artist who can explain what's going on here for us? Okay, let me ask you another question. If you mix yellow and blue, what colour do you get? So we've all trapped ourselves because we're really clever and we think the answer's blue. But actually, if the answer's blue, what happens when that's mixed with the yellow? So, there's a talking point for us. So I've been on a bit of a journey. It's a cliche. This is where the innovations click up really fast if you are keeping track. So I started in about 2007 podcasting, and my God, that was torturous. I used to carry around a digital recorder, a laptop, a microphone, and go to every lecture theatre. Podcasting lasted about a year, and podcasting I have to thank Andy Me for, because he lent me the digital recorder, but then very kindly pointed out, well, there's this thing called Camtasia, and Camtasia can record the screen at the same time as your voice, and it'll run on your laptop. Brilliant, I thought. So I'm now just carrying my laptop, and in order to get wonderful sound quality, a radio, Sennheiser radio mic system. So I only had to carry around 2 big bags of kit and set them up and dismantle them at the beginning and end of every lecture. But I was getting these wonderful things called screencasts, and they were novel in those days. The students loved them. But the thing about a screencast is it's just the screen. Okay, so I was looking for a solution that would allow me to show what I was writing on the whiteboard because, you know, being a good chemist, I don't just have PowerPoint slides. I like to show things on the whiteboard as well. So I looked for something which is called a swivel. So what you can see here is that this is a robotic platform that tracks this marker. So I can take this marker and I can put it around my neck and I can move from left to right in the lecture theatre and the camera will actually track me. If you're in one of those beautiful lecture theatres with a panoramic set of blackboards, this is brilliant because what it allows you to do is to actually start on the left and be recorded walking all the way to the right. Okay, so that's what I call swiveling. This platform is a commercially available platform known as a swivel. Now I've got these wonderful resources. I've got these wonderful, beautiful recorded things. And I became aware of something called flipped teaching. I think it was Alicia McConnell said to me, Simon, have you considered flipped teaching? I thought, yeah, okay, you know, I'll try that. I'll try flipped teaching. And we did a little bit of flipped teaching. Flipped teaching means making the resources available to the students in advance, freeing up time for more of that interactivity that is so precious in the lecture theatre. So we did a bit of flipped teaching. But then Basically, there I was. It's 2011, 2012, and I'm busy flipping my teaching. And I had an opportunity to work with Neil Ward and Helena Gillespie and Fabio again, working on evaluating learning gain at the beginning of the kind of noughties. And what I discovered is that actually this flipped teaching thing is really good if your priority is helping your students to learn. The problem is, if you go full-on flipped teaching mode, the students think they're doing more work. And that's a problem. That is a problem. So I've backed off from full flipping, and I've thought to myself, well, what am I going to do next? I'm this serial innovator who's always trying to jump on the next bandwagon. Well, at least 10 years ago I was. Being Associate Dean has moderated me, okay? Now it's all about expectation management. It's all about setting reasonable levels. But in those days, I would just want to be ahead of the crowd. But we were so far removed from the normal HE teaching experience that I was getting a bit concerned. So what am I going to do next? Well, I thought, let's double down on the nature and the experience of peer instruction in the lecture theatre. So, this is a free text question. And this is an opportunity. You're all very mature. I don't know if there are any trolls online. I haven't had access to the online material. But I'm trusting you to answer this question in a mature fashion. Okay? It's a really important question. I will say, I won't tell you what they put, but I once asked this question of a group of doctors, and I'm sorry, Barbara, but I was shocked by their answers. These were medical doctors. Okay, so when we shed body fat, most of the way exits the body through ... Okay, so we're running a little bit low on time, so I'm going to move us on fairly quickly and see what the answers you put. The lungs, respiration, water, breathing, pores, liver, sweat, nose, poops, inhaled. Okay, so we've got a whole variety of those. I predicted water. I predicted a few of these, and I've condensed it down to this. So I call this crowdsourcing the answer. And sometimes it throws up fascinating things. You source misconceptions you never knew your students had. Your misconceptions were familiar misconceptions. But let's do this question. When we shed body fat, most of the way exits the body through, and I'd like you to all answer the question, please. If you've been sitting on the fence so far, why? It's all anonymous. Why are you sitting on the fence? What have you got to lose? What I say to my students is if you don't commit yourself and risk being wrong, and only people who actually know the answer the question, then there's a danger that I will just move on because I think everybody understands it. If you don't know, you need to share that information. Okay, good. So, what we've got here is a whole mixture of different things. I wish I hadn't used the word mixture now. It's conjuring up horrible images. But what I'd like you to do is to turn to the people around you and have that conversation. But the last conversation wasn't nearly nailed enough. You have strong opinions about what the right answer to this is. So argue them out with the people around you. Time was always going to be the enemy. Do you want me to stop at past or sooner? Maybe a little bit before. Okay, sort of 25. Yeah, this, ladies and gentlemen, is what it's all about. Coming into university and talking about wee-wees and poo and sweat, that is higher education. Okay, right, so in the interest of time, because we do have a really strict chair here, In the interest of time, I'm going to ask you to use the benefit of your conversation and to answer the question again. What's the correct answer to this with the benefit of your discussions? Tiny little detail. I recognise quite a few biologists in the audience. The word exhalation is a concession to biologists. I wanted to call it respiration, but I know you believe that's something else, okay? So exhalation rather than respiration. They're meant to be the same thing to us non-biologists. Okay, good, right. 3, we managed 70 last time. Are you less certain than you were before? 3, 2, 1. Again, the people online are logging a bit, so okie dokies. Right, so now we've moved significantly towards, and it is the right answer. So what happens, of course, is that you use fat as an energy source. It reacts with oxygen in a controlled fashion under enzymatic control. But basically the products are carbon dioxide and water. The water's already there, but it's actually the minor product by mass. So we breathe out CO2. Now, amazingly, people got money to do a scientific study to prove this by labeling the fat with carbon-14 and detecting the carbon-14 in the CO2. That's like getting money to study homeopathy. It's nonsense, okay? It's obvious that this is the way that it takes place. Right, okay, so the return journey. We started with flipped teaching. We doubled down on flipped teaching with crowdsourcing the answers. This surfaces misconceptions you wouldn't otherwise have been aware of. You can go a step further. You can invite your students to actually write the questions. Some of you will have practiced just-in-time teaching, where you have a little online site and you ask the students, what should we be talking about? You can get the students to focus in on the things that really matter to them by engaging them. What I do in my foundation year class, which is a really disparate cohort, but what many of the students have in common is they identify as pharmacists or they identify as biologists. And so to just incentivize that bit more engagement with the questions, I gamify it by having a demographic question and associating them. I haven't really got time to show that in a lot of reasons. Now, the pandemic has allegedly changed everything. Well, not for me it hasn't, quite frankly, because all of this so-called pivoting to online teaching had experimented with all of those approaches already. And what I can tell you is that you can design the best pedagogy you like, but what really matters is the extent to which your students engage with that pedagogy. If you've got a wonderful pedagogy and nobody is doing it because there's no incentive, there's no expectation, there's no culture of engaging with your blended learning resources, until you're brave enough to sit down and have conversations about how learning actually takes place, it doesn't really matter very much. But one thing I will encourage you to do is to think about the question. If you're inspired to want to do more active learning in the lecture theatre is a precious space and time. Make sure that the questions you pose are facilitating learning, not just checking how much someone has learned, but that the questions you pose are actually an opportunity for people to learn something new. So the questions should be challenging. Not everybody should get them right straight away. If they all get them right straight away, that was just a waste. You want a question that is challenging, that encourages students to help each other, to have learning conversations in the lecture theatre. Because if all you're doing is delivering information, you don't actually need the people to come into the lecture theatre to do that. Let's use the time and space that we have together in a constructive and a productive fashion. So the nature of the question is important. However, If you are just preparing a student for one of those interactive sessions, then the questions don't need to be conceptual and challenging. They can just be reminders, helping the student to focus on the materials that they're presented. I call those quizzes. So I ask the student, and quiz to me is an almost derogatory word. A quiz is a low stakes, simple question thing that I deliver at the beginning of a week of study. The quiz tells the students whether they actually need to do additional study before the lecture. If they don't do very well, they're encouraged to review the videos and to prepare themselves for the lecture. If they do well, there's no point in crying wolf. If you already know this stuff, come to the lecture and we'll really test you with conceptual questions. But you don't need to review the video materials. So those are the chunks, the simple video materials with gentle questions. And then there come the vignettes. After the lecture, when you were challenging the student to see how much they really understood, then at that stage, it matters what sort of question you pose. The questions, again, need to be like the questions in the assessment. They need to be challenging. They need to make the students think, not just stay awake. Okay. One of the things that we recognise, and what has changed in the 10 or more years that I've been doing this kind of thing, is that lecture capture has gone mainstream. Thanks to the likes of Kay Yeoman and visionaries like Neil Ward, we now have lecture capture in our at UEA, and it's routine. Most students have access to lecture capture. And that's great, and that's a real positive, and it's hugely beneficial for international students, students with learning difficulties. But the problem, from my point of view, is that they now take it for granted. It's a hygiene factor. You don't get any when 10 years ago, I got brownie points for this. Students were grateful to me. They thought it was clever. Now, it's just something that everybody does. So what I suggest to you, and what I found almost by accident, is that if you involve students in the content creation process, so there's all sorts of partnering aspects to that, but get the students to create content. If they create content, if they think about the questions that go alongside that content that facilitate learning, A, they produce resources for you, and God knows we're all really busy and we need people to produce resources for us, but secondly, they see how much work goes into that and they value it. They value what they've done, and more significantly, they value what we've done, because videos don't grow on VLEs. So that's something that I encourage all of us to do. Now, I've run out of time. So there are markers outside, and so we kind of anticipate. Where's Zinnia? Zinnia, we anticipated this, didn't we, Zinnia? So what we've done is we've set up markers in the wine reception area, because all chemistry and all higher education is best done lubricated by wine. So let's go out there, let's have some wine, let's have a chat, but take the opportunity to take the Chem Forward app, show those markers, and have a play. To me, blended means blending digital and face-to-face teaching. There is no better way of doing that than having students sitting in the lecture theatre, scanning your marker and deciding for themselves what orientation of the molecule explains the geometry to them. If I'm putting a PowerPoint slide, I've got one image I can show them. If I give them an AR marker, they can make that molecule whatever size they like. They can make multiple copies. They can overlay them. They can rotate them. They can stretch them. They can do whatever they like. You're putting control in the hands of the students. Okay, so there was going to be another question, but I just bring us back to acknowledgements and stick vaguely on time. Mark knows for me that's a good achievement. Thank you.
was head of chemistry, the first time that Simon came in to see me, he actually did say to me, kick me out after 30 minutes because I'll just keep talking for the whole time. So, Simon, that was excellent. I'm going to say a cliche again, because you mentioned this, the journey from the crystal growing, reaction inventing, inorganic researcher to a world-leading academic innovator using social media, Blackboard, thanks for that, and virtual reality to engage and enhance students in the world of chemistry and in education is just amazing. And on top of that, he also made us work for it as well, which is always a good thing. So I think I speak for all of the students who've been through UEA over the last however many years you've been here, and say thank you for everything you've done, both for UEA chemistry, for the university in general, and now for the science faculty as well. So thank you for all your hard work. Now, I'm sure Simon would be willing to answer a few questions, if we have any.
Okay, I will be willing to answer any questions, but I have a Halloween warning to make. Make sure they're questions, because you don't know what my next slide is.
Richard.
Well, Simon was a wonderful lecture, and as you know, over many years, being a colleague of yours, I've been enthused by your stories and what you can get. Let me say that again for the benefit of the internet. Simon, what a wonderful lecture, and as you know, I've been enthused by discovering what you do and to some extent try to emulate it in my own teaching. So I'd like to ask a question where you can't possibly feel that you have to put it into practice. Simon, if you had unlimited resources, what innovation in teaching would you bring to UEA?
If I had infinite resources, well, there's only
Unlimited resources.
So the resource that I don't have enough of is time. I don't need infinite time, but I need considerably more time than is available in the week in a degree, and I would use that to make sure that we had meaningful understanding before we progressed. But there would need to be, if a student's not engaged, it doesn't matter how much time you have. So there would be an understanding, a contract, if you will, that university was for lasting and meaningful understanding. So, yeah.
Right at the back there.
Thank you. It's a long way to go with the microphone. Simon, what would you like to see your students doing more of, and what would you like to see them doing less of?
It's difficult not to be facetious in response to a question like that, isn't it? I mean, I hope it's not a throwaway answer. It's not intended to be. When I say I'd like to see more of my students thinking, and I'd like to see less of them, I guess, wanting or imagining that learning is something that will sort of happen. But, very specifically, I'd like to see them doing less asking for practice assessments, because higher education is about much more than practicing exam papers. So thank you, Adam. That's a great question.
We've got an online question, actually, just at the back there.
We do. We've got a few, but I'll start just with one before we go back to our in-person audience. And that is, what is your vision, Simon, for the future of higher education?
Okay, well, it depends whether I'm having a migraine or not, which is something that Mark alluded to. But seriously, my vision for higher education, I guess it's that we get honest. Basically, we're much more honest as a society. It's not a higher education problem, it's a society problem. We need to be honest about what higher education is for, and we need to do away with league tables. We need to put trust back into our educators. Is that enough? That's my vision. It's not going to happen, but that's my vision.
Hi, Simon. I'd just like
Hi,
to
Rob.
know in your opinion, what do you think is your most satisfying teaching experience?
Okay, that's a great question. Incidentally, Rob is a contemporary of mine, and I've followed his teaching work with great interest. Actually, it always comes afterwards, Rob. My most satisfying teaching experience is when a student comes up to me years later and says, I was going to say remember, but that's definitely the wrong word. I still understand why the CO stretching frequency is dependent on the charge on the transition metal. That, if a student, gets the concepts and they stick, like learning to ride a bike, like learning to swim. So my greatest satisfactions come years after the event when a student voluntarily tells me that something stuck.
Thank you, Simon. I want to ask, it's a practical kind of question. I hope you don't think it's very mean, because I am actually curious about your opinion. How do you, or can you, or actually are you interested in controlling if the students are using the technology to answer your polls and tweet your hashtags and not doing their own things?
It's a good question. It's a good question. I've been here a long time, so I remember back in the early 2000s, basically intercepting a piece of paper that was in the lecture theatre because it was very interesting, and it was students playing a game of boxes, where you draw the things and you go around. There's nothing new about distraction. The distraction wasn't invented with the internet or mobile phones. There's nothing new about distraction. My attitude in a nutshell for mature undergraduate students is if you just beat them at their own game, so to thing, make what you're doing more obviously valuable. Than the alternatives. But I've no illusions. I mean, the 50-minute lecture slot is a convenience of the infrastructure that we have. I mean, I can't suggest a better one, but it's everyone knows it's not a sensible way of organising people's learning, but I'm not suggesting that we have 20-minute lectures and that people spend most of their time transitioning. So, there'll be opportunities. So I would, I try and get students engaged in the demonstration, but it's basically a change is as good as a rest. That's the idiom I was looking for. A change is as good as a rest. I'll vary things up and hopefully I'll catch their interest. But I've no illusions. Frankly, honestly, that's again another really serious conversation. I mean, this is not LTC, and I'm here as an inaugural lecturer, so I can give you my personal opinion. My personal opinion is that we, again, shouldn't really have compulsory lectures. We should basically enter in an adult conversation with our students, and the students should decide whether something's doing it. And then pretty quickly, if all that's happening in your lecture environment is that you're transmitting information, then the students who we say are critical thinkers will critically think on their feet, and they'll pretty quickly decide not to come. So that's redress this. But that involves having these conversations. I mean, we shouldn't really start teaching higher education discipline-based material until we've taken the time to teach students how they learn. Because it's kind of pointless. If you can get students with an understanding of how the learning process actually works, then they'll invest in that and they'll understand why you're doing things. I mean, I stuck on Blackboard an open invitation on all of my modules. It was very vain of me, but I said to them, if you want to know why I teach the way that I do, I'll be talking about that this evening. And I think there may be a few students online, but, I'm hoping that actually better people than me, Kay and Fabio, no pressure Fabio, but I'm hoping that, we'll start having those conversations because I really think we need to.
Let's take another question from online.
this person, it's anonymous, so I don't have a name, but they said, thank you for a really brilliant lecture.
It would be anonymous, wouldn't it?
And
It wasn't me. You've seen me. My hands are here. Yeah.
the question is, what education challenge do your students complain about the most?
You know, they complain about time. They complain that there isn't enough time to do the things. So these blended learning structures, they actually, you know, our students are expected to spend 30 hours a week. So if they're doing 3 modules in a semester, 10 hours a week on each module over the course of the semester. And what I'm saying to the students is, if you engage in this structured blended learning program right through the week, then actually the idea is that you understand this material. So you don't have to store up your huge number of hours for a cramming marathon immediately before the exam because you've done it. But you know, that's not UEA's fault. That is, again, a societal problem, and it's reinforced by our obsession with league tables and assessments. So, yeah, I think it's time. We're all up against it when it comes to time. And one thing I would absolutely say is when I take a group of people like you, and many of you are academics and university administrators and things, you behave in exactly the same way as students. There's no them and us. There's only human beings.
And on that note, I think it's time for us to go and look at those cards and look at some chemistry. But I think it's only right for us as well to thank Simon again for an excellent lecture, and he really did blow away the inaugural lecture, I think. So congratulations, Simon. Well done.